She walked past them every day. The doctors, the nurses, the administrators in their pressed white coats. They saw her hunched shoulders, her oversized scrubs, the way she flinched at loud noises. They saw someone broken, someone past her prime, someone who didn't belong in the pristine halls of Metropolitan General Hospital. What they didn't see was the tattoo hidden beneath her sleeve, a parachute with wings, the mark of a pararescue jumper, the most elite combat medics in the U.S. military. They didn't see the woman who had pulled 23 soldiers from a burning helicopter in Helmand Province, the woman who had performed a thoracotomy with a pocket knife in the back of a moving vehicle under enemy fire, the woman who had been awarded 3 Bronze Stars and a Silver Star, all classified, all buried in a file marked redacted. They saw a liability. She was a weapon they didn't know was loaded. This is the story of Emma Cross, and the night she reminded everyone that the quietest person in the room is often the most dangerous.
Metropolitan General wasn't just a hospital. It was a temple to ego. The doctors here didn't just save lives, they built careers, courted pharmaceutical reps, and posted their success stories on social media. The nursing staff wasn't much better. Most of them had come from prestigious programs, and they treated the hospital like an exclusive club. Emma Cross didn't fit the profile. At 42 years old, she was starting over with an associate nursing degree from a community college. Her resume showed a decade-long gap with vague references to government contract work. Her letters of recommendation were signed by people whose names were blacked out. The hiring manager, a woman named Patricia Chen, had hesitated during the interview. "You understand this is a Level 1 trauma center," Patricia had said, studying Emma's weathered hands. "The pace here is intense. Are you sure you're ready for this environment?" Emma had met her eyes, briefly, just long enough to be respectful, and said, "I've worked in intense environments before." Patricia couldn't put her finger on it, but something about this woman's stillness unsettled her. Not in a threatening way, more like standing next to deep water and not being able to see the bottom. Against her better judgment, Patricia hired her. They needed bodies for the night shift. Emma could do vitals, change linens, and stay out of the way. That was the plan, anyway.
First week. The mockery started on day 3. Dr. Adrian Voss, a 34-year-old cardiac surgeon with a God complex and a social media following to match, held court in the physician's lounge. Emma had just finished restocking the crash cart when she overheard him. "Did you see the new one? Looks like someone's grandmother wandered out of a retirement home." Laughter rippled through the room. Emma kept moving, her expression unchanged. "I asked her to prep an intubation tray," continued Voss. "She was shaking so badly I thought she was having a seizure. Probably should have retired a decade ago." More laughter. Emma walked away, carrying an armload of soiled linens toward the chute. As she passed a mirror in the hallway, she caught her own reflection. The tremor in her hands was visible, even to her. It wasn't fear. It wasn't weakness. It was the price of 20 years in war zones. Repetitive blast exposure, traumatic brain injury from an IED that had killed her co-pilot and left her with a titanium plate in her skull, and nerve damage that would never fully heal. The VA doctors had told her the tremors would improve with time. They were wrong. But Emma had learned to work around them. In her old life, she had performed field amputations with hands that shook. She had inserted chest tubes while taking mortar fire. Shaky hands didn't mean incompetent hands, but these people didn't know that, and Emma wasn't about to tell them.
The humiliation. 2 weeks in, the situation escalated. Emma was assigned to shadow Dr. Voss during morning rounds. It was supposed to be a learning opportunity. Instead, it became a public execution. They were standing at the bedside of a 70-year-old man recovering from bypass surgery when Voss turned to Emma. "Nurse Cross, tell me, what's the most common complication following CABG?" Emma knew the answer. She had treated dozens of post-operative cardiac patients in field hospitals from Kandahar to Baghdad. But something in Voss's tone told her this wasn't really a question. It was a trap. "Infection," Emma said quietly. "Or arrhythmia, depending on the patient's—" "Wrong!" Voss cut her off, his voice dripping with condescension. "The correct answer is atrial fibrillation. Maybe if you'd gone to a real nursing school instead of whatever online diploma mill you attended, you'd know that." The medical students behind them snickered. Emma said nothing. Her face remained neutral, but something flickered in her eyes, just for a second, a coldness that made one of the students stop laughing. "I need someone competent," Voss announced to the group. "Nurse Cross, you're dismissed. Go find some bedpans to empty. That seems more your speed." Emma left the room without a word. She walked down the corridor, through the main ward, past the nurses' station, where two younger nurses whispered and giggled as she passed. She walked until she reached the supply closet at the end of the hall. Only then, in the darkness surrounded by boxes of gauze and IV bags, did she allow herself a single moment of weakness. Her hands weren't just shaking now, they were trembling violently. Not from humiliation, from rage.
She had spent 20 years saving lives in conditions these people couldn't imagine. She had performed battlefield surgery in a sandstorm. She had held dying 19-year-olds in her arms and promised them they'd make it home, even when she knew they wouldn't. And now she was being mocked by a man whose biggest challenge was choosing which luxury car to drive to work. Emma closed her eyes. She breathed, in through the nose, out through the mouth. The same breathing technique that had kept her calm when Taliban fighters were closing in on her position. The same technique that had kept her steady when she had to make the choice between saving one patient or another because there wasn't time or supplies for both. After 60 seconds, her hands stopped shaking. She opened her eyes. She went back to work. This was her life now. She had chosen this. She could endure this. But the universe, it seemed, had other plans.
The alert. It happened on a Tuesday night. Emma was working the graveyard shift, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. The hospital was quiet. Most of the staff was either catching naps in the break room or scrolling through their phones at the nurses' station. Emma was in room 347, helping an elderly woman to the bathroom when she heard it, a sound most people wouldn't have recognized, but Emma did. It was the distinctive whump, whump, whump of a military helicopter, not a regular medevac bird, something heavier, a pave hawk or a Chinook. She froze, listening. The sound grew louder, closer. Then came the PA system. Code trauma, level 1, rooftop helipad. All available personnel to Trauma Bay 1. Repeat, code trauma. The elderly woman looked at Emma with frightened eyes. "What's happening?" "Just a busy night," Emma said gently, helping the woman back to bed. "You're safe. I'll be right back." She walked quickly, not running, hospital policy, toward the trauma bay. By the time she arrived, the controlled chaos was already underway. Dr. Voss was barking orders, nurses were wheeling in equipment, and through the bay doors she could see the helicopter on the roof. Two things struck her immediately. First, the helicopter had bullet holes in its fuselage. Second, the men climbing out weren't regular paramedics. They were operators, special forces. She recognized the way they moved, the way they scanned their surroundings, even while unloading a stretcher. This wasn't a car accident. This was a combat casualty. Emma stayed back, at the edge of the crowd. She wasn't assigned to the trauma bay. Her job was to observe, to stay invisible.
The stretcher burst through the doors. The patient was a mess. Male, early 40s, multiple gunshot wounds to the chest and abdomen. His tactical vest had been cut away, revealing a chest cavity that looked like a war zone. Blood everywhere, vitals crashing. "Talk to me," Voss shouted, pulling on gloves. "Multiple GSWs," the lead paramedic reported, his voice tight. "Took fire during an extraction operation. Lost his pulse once in the bird, got him back. BP is 80/50 and dropping. He's bleeding out." One of the operators, a massive man with a scarred jaw and cold eyes, grabbed Voss by the arm. "Listen to me, Doc. That's Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Reeves. He is not dying in this hospital, whatever it takes. You understand?" Voss yanked his arm free. "Get these men out of my trauma bay. Security!" The operators were ushered out, but their presence lingered. This wasn't just any patient. This was someone important, someone whose death would have consequences. Emma watched from the doorway as Voss and his team worked. They were good, technically proficient, but Emma could see the problem they were missing. The bleeding wasn't slowing down. They had packed the chest wounds, started transfusions, pushed vasopressors, but the blood pressure kept dropping. Voss was looking in the wrong place. Emma's eyes tracked the blood pooling on the floor. Too much blood, and it wasn't coming from the chest. It was coming from lower, the pelvis, the groin. She knew what that meant. Junctional hemorrhage, a tear in one of the major vessels near the pelvis where tourniquets don't work and direct pressure is nearly impossible. It was one of the leading causes of preventable death in combat trauma, and they were missing it. "We're losing him," a nurse screamed. The monitor showed a heart rate of 140, blood pressure 60/40. The patient was coding.
"Epi, 1 milligram. Push it now," Voss shouted. "Where the hell is all this blood coming from?" Emma took a step forward, then stopped. This wasn't her place. She wasn't assigned here. If she intervened and was wrong, she'd be fired. If she intervened and was right, she'd still probably be fired for overstepping. But then she looked at the patient's face. Through the blood and the oxygen mask, she saw something. A tattoo on his forearm, partially obscured but unmistakable. De oppresso liber, to free the oppressed, the motto of Army Special Forces. This man was one of hers, not literally. She'd been Air Force, he was Army, but in every way that mattered. He was a brother in arms. He had run toward danger while others ran away. He had made the choice to stand between innocent people and evil, and he was dying because the doctor in charge was too proud to see the problem right in front of him. Emma made her decision.
The save. She crossed the room in 4 strides. A resident tried to block her. "You're not supposed to be—" Emma sidestepped him without breaking stride. Her movements were smooth, efficient, almost mechanical. Muscle memory from 1,000 trauma scenarios. "What the hell are you doing?" Voss shouted as Emma approached the table. She didn't answer. She grabbed a pair of trauma shears from the instrument tray and cut away the patient's pants completely, exposing the upper thigh and groin area. There, a massive hematoma, swollen and dark. The femoral artery was torn, bleeding internally, hidden by the swelling. "Junctional hemorrhage," Emma said. Her voice had changed. It was no longer quiet, no longer uncertain. It was the command voice, the voice that had directed teams of medics under fire. "He's bleeding from the femoral. You're missing it." "Security!" Voss roared. "Get her out of—" Emma didn't wait for permission. She jammed 2 fingers directly into the wound, probing until she felt the pulse of the artery against her fingertips. The patient's body jerked, blood sprayed, but Emma's hands didn't shake. Not now, not when it mattered. She found the tear. She pressed down, hard, using the pelvic bone as an anchor. The arterial spray slowed, then stopped. The room went silent. Every eye was on the monitor. The blood pressure ticked up. 65/45, then 70/50. "He's stabilizing," whispered one of the nurses, her voice filled with disbelief. Emma held the pressure. Her arm was already burning from the awkward angle, but she didn't move. She looked at Voss. "Get me a junctional tourniquet, now." Voss just stared at her. His face had gone pale. Around him, his team was frozen in shock. "Now, doctor," Emma repeated. Someone shoved the device into Emma's free hand. She worked quickly, securing the tourniquet around the upper thigh, cranking it tight until the bleeding stopped completely. Only then did she withdraw her hands. The patient's vitals held, heart rate dropping, blood pressure climbing. He was still critical, but he wasn't actively dying anymore. Emma stepped back from the table. Her scrubs were soaked in blood, her hands were covered in it, and now that the adrenaline was fading, they were shaking again. She looked at Voss. He was staring at her like he was seeing her for the first time. "You can finish from here," Emma said quietly. Then she turned and walked out of the trauma bay. She made it halfway down the hall before her legs gave out. She caught herself against the wall, breathing hard. The adrenaline crash was hitting. Her vision swam. The old injury in her skull was screaming, sending ice picks of pain through her temple. She heard footsteps behind her, heavy boots. She turned. It was the operator from earlier, the one with the scarred jaw. He was standing 10 feet away, studying her with the careful intensity of someone who knew how to read people. "You're military," he said. It wasn't a question. Emma didn't confirm or deny, she just met his eyes. The operator took a step closer. He was looking at her hands, at the slight favoring of her left leg, at the way she held herself despite the obvious pain. "Air Force," he said slowly. "Pararescue, maybe? That's a PJ technique, blind arterial compression." Emma's silence was answer enough. The man's expression changed. Respect replaced suspicion. He came to attention and rendered a crisp salute. "Thank you, ma'am. You just saved my colonel's life." Emma didn't return the salute. She couldn't. Not in scrubs, not covered in blood, not as a civilian. Instead, she just nodded. "Make sure he gets to surgery," she said. "The tourniquet will hold for 2 hours, maybe 3. After that, he'll need vascular repair." "Yes, ma'am." Emma turned and walked away. Behind her, she could hear raised voices from the trauma bay. Voss was already spinning the story, she was sure, already finding a way to take credit or deflect blame. She didn't care. The patient would live. That was all that mattered. But as she pushed open the door to the women's locker room, she knew her time at Metropolitan General was over. She had broken every rule. She had overstepped her authority. She had assaulted a patient. At least, that's how the lawyers would see it. She sat down on the bench and put her head in her hands. This was it, her second chance at a normal life. Gone. She should have known better. She wasn't built for normal.
The interrogation. Patricia Chen's office was small and cramped. Emma sat across from her, still in her blood-stained scrubs. Patricia hadn't said a word since Emma walked in. She just kept staring at the incident report on her desk. Finally, she looked up. "Dr. Voss is calling for your termination. He's saying you assaulted a patient, practiced outside your scope, and endangered the hospital's liability insurance. He's also saying you physically pushed one of the residents." Emma said nothing. "He's also saying," Patricia continued, "that you saved that man's life, that if you hadn't intervened, Lieutenant Colonel Reeves would be dead right now." Still nothing. Patricia leaned back in her chair. "Who are you, Emma? And don't give me the community college story. I've been a nurse for 30 years. I know what I saw in that trauma bay. That wasn't something you learned from a textbook." Emma met her eyes. For a long moment, neither woman spoke. Then Emma reached up and slowly rolled up her left sleeve. The tattoo was there, faded but unmistakable. The parachute wings, the Air Force crest, and beneath it, a motto, "That others may live." Patricia's breath caught. "Oh my God, you're a PJ." "Was," Emma corrected. "I retired 3 years ago. Medical discharge. TBI and nerve damage from an IED. I can't jump anymore, can't deploy. So I came here, thinking I could still help people, thinking I could do the work without the war."
"But they didn't believe you could," Patricia said softly. "No, they saw a middle-aged woman with shaky hands and assumed I was incompetent. And I let them. Because I didn't want the attention. I didn't want to be thanked for my service or asked about my deployments or treated like some kind of hero. I just wanted to work." Patricia was quiet for a long time. Then she closed the incident report. "Emma, I can't ignore this. There will have to be a review. But I can tell you right now, you're not getting fired. Not on my watch." Emma blinked. "What? That man upstairs is alive because you knew what to do when everyone else was panicking. That's not a liability. That's the kind of nurse every hospital should be fighting to keep." Before Emma could respond, there was a knock on the door. Patricia frowned and opened it. Standing in the hallway was the operator from earlier, along with two other men in suits. They had the unmistakable look of federal agents. "Ms. Chen," one of them said, flashing credentials, "we need to speak with Nurse Cross. It's urgent." The truth. They took Emma to a private conference room. The operator, whose name she learned was Master Sergeant Rick Kowalski, did most of the talking. Lieutenant Colonel Reeves wasn't just on any mission, Kowalski explained. He was leading a joint task force investigating a domestic terrorist cell. They've been targeting military personnel and their families. We think there's a leak inside the DoD, someone feeding them intel on troop movements and safe houses. Emma listened, her expression neutral. "The colonel was meeting with an informant when they got hit. Ambush. We lost 2 men getting him out, and now he's the only one who knows the identity of the leak." "Why are you telling me this?" Emma asked. One of the federal agents leaned forward. "Because the people who tried to kill the colonel aren't done. They know he's here, and they're going to try to finish the job." Emma felt a chill run down her spine. "You're saying the hospital is a target?" "We're saying you need to be ready," Kowalski said. "The colonel asked for you specifically. He wants you on his security detail until he's stable enough to transfer." "I'm a nurse, not a bodyguard." "You're a combat medic with a top-secret clearance and 20 years of experience keeping people alive in hostile territory," Kowalski corrected. "With all due respect, ma'am, you're exactly what we need." Emma looked at the faces around the table. These weren't hospital administrators worried about liability. These were operators worried about survival. She thought about Lieutenant Colonel Reeves lying in that ICU bed, vulnerable and unconscious. She thought about the nurses and doctors on that floor who had no idea they might be in danger. She thought about Dr. Voss and his smug smile, his casual cruelty. Would she protect him if it came down to it? The answer, she realized, was yes, because that's what she did. That's who she was. "Okay," Emma said. "What do you need me to do?" The vigil. The ICU was quiet, too quiet. Emma sat in a chair outside room 12, where Lieutenant Colonel Reeves was recovering from surgery. The vascular team had repaired the femoral artery. He was stable, sedated, and under heavy guard. Officially, Emma was still just a nurse, but Kowalski had arranged for her to be assigned exclusively to Reeves' care. It gave her a reason to be in the room, to watch the monitors, to be ready. The night stretched on. Emma's shift should have ended at 7 a.m., but she didn't leave. Neither did Kowalski and his team, who had taken up positions at strategic points around the ICU. At 3:47 a.m., the power went out. It happened so suddenly that for a moment no one moved. Then the emergency generators kicked in, bathing the corridors in dim red light. But something was wrong. Emma could feel it. The backup power should have been seamless, but there had been a gap. Just a few seconds, but enough. Someone had cut the main power deliberately. Emma stood up, her hand instinctively reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. Kowalski appeared at her side, a pistol drawn. "They're here," he said quietly. And then, from somewhere down the hall, came the sound of breaking glass. The siege. What happened next would be debated in official reports for months. The security footage would be analyzed frame by frame. Witness statements would be taken and retaken, but the basic facts were undeniable.
4 men entered Metropolitan General Hospital at 0350 hours through a service entrance on the 3rd floor. They were armed with suppressed weapons and moved with military precision. Their target, Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Reeves, room 12, ICU. Their mistake, they assumed the only resistance would be hospital security and a few off-duty cops. They didn't account for Master Sergeant Kowalski and his team, and they definitely didn't account for Emma Cross. The first 2 intruders made it as far as the ICU nurses' station before Kowalski's team intercepted them. The firefight was brief and brutal. 1 intruder went down, the other retreated. But the other 2 had split off, moving through the surgical ward to flank Reeves's room. Emma heard them coming, the soft squeak of tactical boots on linoleum, the whisper of suppressed radios. She positioned herself inside Reeves's room, standing between the door and the bed. She wasn't armed, but the room was full of equipment, IV poles, oxygen tanks, a defibrillator on a wheeled cart. The door opened slowly. A rifle barrel appeared first, sweeping the room. Then the shooter stepped inside. Emma moved. She grabbed the IV pole with both hands and swung it like a bat, connecting with the rifle and knocking it toward the ceiling. The weapon discharged with a muffled pfft, putting a hole in the ceiling tile. The shooter tried to bring the weapon back down, but Emma was already inside his guard. She drove her knee into his thigh, hitting the peroneal nerve cluster. His leg buckled. She wrenched the rifle from his hands, her training screaming at her about trigger discipline and muzzle awareness, and reversed it, driving the stock into his face. He went down hard.
The second shooter entered, saw his partner on the ground, and swung his weapon toward Emma. She dropped the rifle and dove behind the crash cart, shoving it forward as she moved. The bullets meant for her chest slammed into the defibrillator unit, sparking and smoking. Emma came up on the other side of the cart. The shooter tracked her, finger tightening on the trigger. And then a voice from the bed said, "Hey." The shooter's eyes flicked toward the sound. It was just for a second, but a second was all Emma needed. She grabbed the oxygen tank from the wall mount, a massive green cylinder, and hurled it like a battering ram. It caught the shooter in the chest, driving him backward into the wall. His weapon clattered to the floor. Emma scooped it up, checked the chamber, flicked off the safety, and aimed it at the downed men. "Don't move," she said. Behind her, Lieutenant Colonel Reeves was awake, pale and sweating, but conscious. He looked at Emma standing there in her blood-stained scrubs, holding a rifle like she'd been born with it. "I knew it," he rasped. "I knew you were one of us." Kowalski burst into the room seconds later, his team securing the area. He looked at the 2 unconscious attackers, then at Emma. "Hell of a nurse," he said. Emma lowered the weapon, ejected the magazine, and cleared the chamber before handing it to him. Her hands were shaking violently now, the adrenaline crash hitting hard.
"I need to sit down," she said quietly. But before she could, the door opened again. This time it was Patricia Chen, followed by a crowd of doctors, nurses, and hospital security. And at the front of the group, looking shocked and pale, was Dr. Adrian Voss. Everyone stared at the scene, the broken equipment, the blood, the unconscious men on the floor, and Emma Cross, the quiet nurse with the shaky hands, standing in the middle of it all.
The aftermath. The FBI took over the investigation. The attackers were identified as former military contractors with ties to the terrorist cell. The leak inside the DoD was found and arrested. Lieutenant Colonel Reeves made a full recovery, but at Metropolitan General, everything changed. Dr. Voss didn't apologize. Men like him rarely did. But he stopped making jokes about the older nurses. He stopped mocking people for their trembling hands or their humble backgrounds, because he had learned, in the most dramatic way possible, that you can never truly know what someone has survived just by looking at them. Emma stayed on at the hospital.
Patricia Chen promoted her to a specialized role in the trauma department, training other nurses in emergency response protocols. The younger nurses who had laughed at her now asked her for advice. The residents who had dismissed her now listened when she spoke. And late at night, when the hospital was quiet and the halls were empty, you could sometimes see her standing by the window in the ICU, looking out at the city lights. She was no longer invisible, but she was still watchful, still ready, because some instincts never fade, and some warriors never truly leave the battlefield. They just find new ways to serve.
Emma Cross's story reminds us of something we often forget in our rush to judge. The person bagging your groceries might be a former CEO who lost everything and rebuilt from scratch. The janitor mopping the floors might have an engineering degree from a country that doesn't recognize foreign credentials. The quiet colleague who never talks about their past might have lived through things you can't imagine. Competence doesn't always announce itself. Strength doesn't always look strong, and the most dangerous person in the room is often the one no one's paying attention to. Before you dismiss someone because they don't fit your idea of excellence, remember Emma. Remember that shaking hands can still save lives, that age is not the same as irrelevance, that silence is not the same as weakness. The next time you see someone struggling, someone who seems out of place, someone the world has decided doesn't belong, pause, look closer. You might be standing next to a warrior, you just don't know it yet. And maybe, just maybe, that's exactly how they want it. If this story moved you, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe because next week we're telling the story of Marcus Chen, the homeless man who turned out to be a chess grandmaster. You won't want to miss it.